So in fifth grade, things are all right in the sense of that. Sixth grade occurs. Was it the first few months? Was there a time in the beginning where it started? And was there, I guess, the frequency, the intensity, the duration, the power base in your specific circumstance before social media?
So for me, here's the dynamics of my family structure. So my parents had me at 43. So I make a joke of it that I say I was a Catholic accident. Although I believe I've been brought here to do something now, nearing my 50th birthday this year. However, my siblings, they were 19, 17, and 14 when we emigrated to the United States from Italy in 1975. So we arrive in the Lehigh Valley in an area, eastern Pennsylvania, predominantly known at the time. We had Larry Holmes, who was one of the greatest heavyweight boxing champions of the world, great sports, colleges, and so forth. However, Italians weren't very much welcomed because in our area, we were a minority. And certainly, if you were an athlete with some talent, that was frowned upon too by many kids that I grew up with, because God forbid you came in as some Italian to take over somebody's position. That wasn't going to happen.
Wow.
So you grow up with underlining talents. You don't know whether you're a good singer, a dancer, or you play sports, you're fast, whatever. I had some talents. And so I started to kind of, as you play in street football and all this stuff, kids say, well, you're good. Why don't you play football? Why don't you do this? Well, my father, ironically, said he never allowed me to play pee-wee football, this, Pop Warner football. He thought I would get hurt. Who'd have thought that my pain didn't come from playing sports as a young child until I got into high school? It came from the ridicule of not playing.
Not being able to put it out.
Well, because kids would call me various names, referencing me to women's vagina parts, referencing me that I was then getting into the ethnic slurs. I was a Dago, I was a Guinea, I was a Wop. And I always say, what does that mean? I would walk down the hallway. A perfect example. I would remember leaving Mrs. Scheller's class, making a left turn to Mr. Reed's reading class, and they would walk down the hallway and say, hi, Claudio, how did your day go? And I'd say, oh, pretty good, Sarah and John and a group of kids. And I didn't know what that meant. And it would say it every day, same time, same back channel, etc. And the Dago, during the days of Italian immigration, they would pay Italians as their day would go. If they had a good day, they got paid. They got a bad day, Italian immigrants would not be paid between 1880 and 1920. WAP would stand for Walking Without Papers. Many illegal Italian immigrants would come to this country through Ellis Island, and they would have, Tony on their paper. The Godfather kind of illustrated this, but to New York. So they would change their names. And then you had Guineas, which Guinea was synonymous with the African word and the N word in the African American community, but they would be from the country of Guinea in West Africa. So they would refer to Italians who were dark complected as Guineas. It's like we were basically African American in nature, or Italiano Neros, or black Italians. So these things in Italy today, if I walk down the street and I say, oh, tu sei un guapo, somebody would, be either very offended by that because that doesn't exist, although they know it's slang because the Americans made it up. And they made it up during those days here in the United States of 1920 onward. And then, some of these reality shows use it as in comedy things, and so kind of blossom.
However, at the time, it was...
Yeah, I mean, they're ethnic. It's like calling somebody the N-word, or you're all these ethnic slurs that you may talk, whether it's Polish or Jewish or whatever, they're still intrinsically painful to someone, right, from that particular culture. So it started with that. From that, it then continued and exacerbated where, this particular scar on my finger here, it's still very visible. I remember the kid's name, Jimmy Saylor. I'll never forget it. It was a big football player, pushes me into a fire extinguisher and slices my finger open. It cost me 8 stitches here in this pinky. Every day, same kids. I know, and it's interesting.
Was it 6th grade?
Yeah, 6th grade. Then coming home, and I could never match anything, so clothes, it was kind of funny because my parents wouldn't take me to a store where you could buy clothes that match, which is probably now why I'm so obsessed with making sure everything matches from head to toe. And I think when you grow up poor, your parents say, this is what you're getting. You're not going to get more than this. But that started all of the physical and verbal abuse. And I'll never forget it. As I got into middle of 6th grade, then I was walking home trying to figure out, the middle school was roughly 6.5 blocks from my home. I would walk to school. A group of the same kids. These kids were of different ethnicity. I would walk down an alley, and every day they'd say, "There's that Dago Guinea Wop kid," and they would call me retarded and stupid. And I just minded my own business and kept walking until one day it was always trying to get me to fight. And, I was always afraid of fighting to get hurt. I was not that type of kid growing up. But I think as we get older, that aggression builds in there. But one day I look up at a portico, and I just happened to kind of glance. You know how you don't want to bother with somebody and kind of just keep your business. And they started to whale rocks at my face. And they caught me in the face, so they shattered my nose and they shattered my front teeth, which all have been rhinoplasty replaced in my teeth. And I went home. I never forget it. I took the bloody clothes and kind of hid them on top of the below garbage and took a shower. And I didn't want my father or my mother to know. And I failed. I didn't know any better. If you don't tell your mom you have a fever, she's not going to give you aspirin or try to help you. And nor did I tell my mother that I got hit in the face with rocks and showed her the clothes, because number one, she would be very emotionally, upset about it, and then would tell my dad, and it would probably get worse for me. So no one knew what had happened. And as you can imagine, if you have a broken nose and you don't apply ice, your nose grows to be a big bump, which I kind of illustrate photos of that. And it healed as such. And nobody knew, and nobody was the wiser. The problem is that now I want to say I'm disfigured. I got a chipped tooth, which I said to my father, I fell at school. I'll never forget it. So he took me to the dentist. They fixed the tooth. It's not as cosmetically as the way it would be today, as dentists can do. And then the nose healed the way it was. So 6th, 7th, the end of 6th grade, 8th grade, 9th grade, I was the nose, always knows. Ask a question, Claudio knows, and knows always knows. Playing football, I would get tackled. They'd say, wait a minute, we need to I think the young man broke his nose. I had such a big nose here, like a ski slope, that even it kind of got in the way of my football helmet. And then in 11th grade, the helmet hit the bridge of this big nose, shattering the nose again. I'll never forget it kind of spread across my face, which caused me to have another surgery. And then the regular ENT who can fix the nose says, I'm sorry, but I can't put your nose back to normal. I'm not a plastic surgeon. I was like all excited, I'm going to get my nose fixed.
Yeah.
So it didn't work. And it wasn't until the end of my senior year that I finally convinced my father, who laughed. He says, what do you mean? What's wrong with your nose? It's a Roman nose and a bellonized, a beautiful nose. But he never knew. And I didn't dare ever tell him what had happened, because knowing him and knowing that he was like Mussolini as a dictator, he would have said, well, wait a minute. He would have taken me by the ear to these kids and would have, caused problems with the parents. Or said, why didn't you fight them back? And quite frankly, at the time, I was afraid of them. I mean, there was always 3 or 4 or 5 of the same kids every day. So I didn't do anything and just tried to figure out which way to go home.